Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 79 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto. We are in the 27th chapter, which is titled Understanding Material Nature. And it's Lord Kapila speaking to his mother Devahuti. Let us begin by chanting our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestad Bhutale Srimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharne Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastyachade Shatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhaktavrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vanchakalpatarubhyas Cha Kripas Sindhubhya Eva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Right. Verse 9, one's seeing power should be increased through knowledge of spirit and matter, and one should not unnecessarily identify himself with the body and thus become attracted by bodily relationships. So there's a short purport here. As we all know extremely well, too well actually, conditioned souls, they're very eager to identify with the body. They just identify with the body as themselves. And that anything in relationship with the body is mine. In Sanskrit, this is called aham mamata, I and mine. And it's the root cause of all conditioned life. So seeing, the verse is talking about seeing, increasing our seeing power through knowledge of spirit and matter. So we should see things as a combination of matter and spirit. And we should distinguish between the natures of matter and spirit, and we should identify with spirit and not with matter. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, by this knowledge, one should avoid the false bodily concept of life. On we go to verse 10. One should be situated in the transcendental position beyond the stages of material consciousness and should be aloof from all other conceptions of life. Thus realizing freedom from false ego, one should see his own self just as he sees the sun in the sky. That's pretty deep, isn't it? So consciousness, according to Bhagavatam, acts in three stages. There's waking consciousness, means when we are awake. There's sleeping consciousness, which basically means a dreaming type of sleep. And then there's a deep sleep type of consciousness where you're really in deep sleep and there's no real conscious functioning. At least in sleeping, you dream. So in order to become Krishna conscious, we have to become transcendental to these three. And really our present consciousness should be freed from anything other than consciousness of Krishna. Yeah. Chaitanya Charitamrita. Well, this is called Duri Bhutanya Darshana, which means that when one attains perfect Krishna consciousness, he doesn't see anything but Krishna. So Chaitanya Charitamrita says that the perfect devotee may see movable, immovable things, but in all of them he just sees the energy of Krishna acting. Yes. And as soon as he remembers Krishna's energy, he remembers Krishna in person. So therefore, in that sense, he only sees Krishna. Then Brahma Samhita, of course, verse 38, talks of our eyes being smeared with love of Krishna, premanjana churita, bhakti velochanena, and in that way seeing Krishna outside and inside. So in this particular verse it says we should be freed from all other visions, and in this way become free from anything to do with false ego. So then in this way one can see oneself as the eternal servant of Krishna. And there's a term here, chakshushe varkam. As we can see the sun without a doubt, of course, we should develop, the developed devotee sees Krishna and his energy. Yeah. So then one becomes atmadrik, or self-realized. When one becomes free of the false ego of identifying with the body as the self, the actual vision of life is perceivable. Yes. The senses then become purified, and then real service to the Lord can begin when the senses are purified. So we don't have to stop the activities of the senses. That's, we've already discussed quite a bit. But the false ego of identifying with the body just has to be removed. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, then the senses automatically become purified, and with purified senses, one can actually discharge devotional service. So then, verse 11, a liberated soul realizes the absolute personality of Godhead, who is transcendental and who is manifest as a reflection, even in the false ego. He's the support of the material cause, and he enters into everything. He's absolute, one without a second, and he is the eyes of the illusory energy. So Prabhupada begins the not very long purport by saying that a pure devotee can see the presence of the Lord in everything material. But the thing is, the Lord is present there only as a reflection. But Prabhupada says, a pure devotee can realize that in the darkness of material illusion, the only light is the Supreme Lord, who is its support. So, of course, Bhagavad Gita confirms Krishna is the background of the material manifestation. And Brahma Samhita, verse 1, confirms Krishna is the cause of all causes. Then a little further on in Brahma Samhita, we read the verse yesterday or the day before, can't remember the number, but it says, Andantarasta Paramanu Chayantarastam, that the Lord is within every atom, not just in this and every universe, but he's present in every atom, even though he's one without a second. So, So the word advaya means without a second, indicates that although the Lord is represented in everything, including the atoms, but he's never divided. And his presence in everything is going to be explained right here and now in the next verse, verse 12. The presence of the Supreme Lord can be realized just as the sun is realized first as a reflection on water, and again as a second reflection on the wall of a room, although the sun itself is situated in the sky. This example given here of the sun is perfect. The sun is long way from earth, but its reflection is seen in a pot of water, wherever it may be, in the corner of a room or anywhere. The room is dark. The sun is far away in the sky, but the sun's reflection on water illuminates the darkness of the room. So therefore a pure devotee realizes the presence of the Lord in everything by the reflection of his energy. Prabhupada refers to Vishnu Purana, which says that the presence of fire is understood by heat and light. So the Lord, although one without a second, is perceived everywhere by his energies. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it is confirmed in the Ishopanishad that the presence of the Lord is perceived everywhere by the liberated soul, just as the sunshine and the reflection can be perceived everywhere, although the sun is situated far away from the surface of the globe. Verse 13, the self-realized soul is thus reflected first in the threefold ego and then in the body, senses, and mind. So there's quite an extensive purport here. I mean, not that long, but it's substantial. So again, the conditioned soul thinks he's this body. Liberated soul thinks, I'm not the body, I'm spirit soul. So the I am is the ego, identification of the self. And false ego means I am this body and everything in relation to it is mine. This is false ego, I and mine. But when one is self-realized and thinks he's a servant of the Lord, that is real ego. So of course we are in the darkness of the three modes. And then over and above the three modes is Shuddha Sattva, pure goodness, which is also always present. So when one is reflected through the material contamination of body and mind, one is conditioned. But when one is reflected in the pure stage, one is liberated. These tendencies to identify with the body and with one's material possessions, these things need to be purified. We need to identify ourselves in relationship with the Lord. So therefore Krishna consciousness is the actual liberated stage. Prabhupada concludes the paragraph by saying, otherwise, both accepting and rejecting on the material platform, or in voidness or impersonalism, are imperfect conditions for the pure soul. So now the second paragraph. So by understanding the pure soul, Satyadrik, one can see everything as a reflection of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So Prabhupada gives what he calls a concrete example. A conditioned soul sees a rose and thinks the aroma should be used for his sense gratification. But the liberated soul sees the same rose as a reflection of the Lord. And he thinks this beautiful flower is made of the energy of the Lord, so it belongs to the Lord, should be used in his service. Anyway, these are two kinds of vision, that's a fact. The conditioned soul sees the flower for his own enjoyment. The devotee sees the flower, same flower, as an object to be used in the Lord's service. So similarly, one can see the reflection of the Supreme Lord in one's own senses, mind and body, in everything. And with that correct vision, you can engage everything in the service of the Lord. And Prabhupada refers to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, which says that a person who's engaged everything, life, wealth, intelligence, words, in the service of the Lord, or who wants to do that, is considered liberated or satya drik. Such a man has understood things as they are. So, on to verse 14. Although devotee appears to be merged in the five material elements, the objects of material enjoyment, the material senses, and material mind and intelligence, although the devotee appears to be merged in all these things, he's understood to be awake and to be freed from the false ego. So Prabhupada refers to Srila Rupa Goswami's explanation in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu about how a person can be liberated even in this body. So this verse is more elaborately explaining that. So the living entity who has become Satya Drik, if you remember from the previous purport, who has realized his position in relationship to the Lord, may appear to be merged in these things, the five elements of matter, the five material sense objects, the 10 senses, and the mind and intelligence, but he's still considered to be awake and to be freed from the reaction of false ego. So the word lina is very significant, Prabhupada says. The Mayavadis recommend merging in the impersonal effulgence of Brahman. That's their goal, destination. But the merging which is mentioned here in this verse is a different type of merging. In it, one can keep one's individuality. So the example given is Jiva Goswami, who talks about the two green birds in the green tree. They appear to merge, but they don't actually lose their individualities. So similarly, the living entity in this material world appears to merge, but doesn't give up his individuality. The real individuality is to understand that ourselves as the eternal servants of the Lord. So Lord Chaitanya said this to Sanatana Goswami, Jivera Swarupoya, Krishnera Nichadas. Living entity is the servitor of Krishna eternally. So we're part and parcel of the whole of Krishna. We're meant to serve the whole. This is individuality. And in material life, it's also like that. When the living entity merges into matter, his gross body is made of the 5 elements. His subtle body is made of 5 elements as earth, water, fire, air, and ether. Subtle body is mind, intelligence, false ego, and contaminated consciousness. Then there's 5 active senses, 5 knowledge acquiring senses. In this way he merges, so to speak, in matter. But Prabhupada makes the point that even while apparently merged in matter, or in the 24 elements of matter, he can keep his individuality as the eternal servant of the Lord. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, either in the spiritual nature or in the material nature, such a servitor is to be considered a liberated soul. That is the explanation of the authorities, and it is confirmed in this verse. Verse 15. The living entity can vividly feel his existence as the seer, but because of the disappearance of the ego during the state of deep sleep, he falsely takes himself to be lost, like a man who has lost his fortune and feels distressed, thinking himself to be lost. Only in ignorance do we think we're lost. The living entity thinks he's lost. But if through knowledge you can come to your real position of eternal existence, then you'll know that you're not lost. And a nice example is mentioned here. Nashtavita ivatura. A person who has lost a great sum of money may think he's lost, but actually he is not lost, only his money is lost. But due to absorption in his money, identifying with it, he thinks that he is lost. So when we falsely identify with matter as our field of activities, we think we're lost, although we're not. As soon as we understand we're eternal servants of the Lord, our real position is revived. Actually, we can never be lost. Prabhupada says that. We can never be lost. So, when it happens that we're deeply in sleep, we become absorbed in dreams, then we may think we're someone else and possibly that we're lost. You might have had experience of, in some bad dreams, thinking you're fallen. Prabhupada talks about a person sleeping and thinking he's being chased by a tiger, which obviously he's not. It's just a dream. So actually, even when we forget our identity, still our identity is intact. So this idea of being lost is just due to false ego. And it continues as long as we're not awakened to the fact that we're the eternal servants of the Lord. So the Mayavadi philosopher's concept of becoming one with the Lord, devotees, Prabhupada says, it's another symptom of being lost in the false ego. So you can falsely claim that you're the Lord, but you're not. So therefore this is the last snare of Maya. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, to think oneself equal with the Supreme Lord, or to think oneself to be the Supreme Lord himself, is also due to false ego. In other words, you're in a materially conditioned state. So verse 16, when by mature understanding one can realize his individuality, then the situation he accepts under false ego becomes manifest to him. Prabhupada again talks about the Mayavadis, their idea that ultimately the individual is lost and everything becomes one. And there's no distinction between the knower, the knowable, and knowledge. But the thing is, if we take a little time to analyze this, we see it's not correct. It can't be correct. Individuality is never lost, even when you think that the knower, knowable, and knowledge are merged into one. So the concept that the three become one is another form of knowledge. And since the perceiver of the knowledge still exists, how can one say that the knower, knowable, and knowledge have become one? Prabhupada's really going into it so much. The individual, that's you. The individual soul who is perceiving all this, that's you, still is still there as an individual. So therefore, both in spiritual and material existence, individuality continues. The only difference is the quality of identity. Right, so in the material identity, the false ego acts. And because of false identification, one takes things to be different from what they really are. And Prabhupada says that is the basic principle of material life. You take yourself to be something different from what you are. You take your family members to be some things different to what they are. And that is simply the beginning of it. Yeah. But Prabhupada says that's the basic principle of material life. All right. So similarly, when the false ego is purified, then one gets everything in the right perspective. That's the state of liberation. So Ishopanishad makes it clear everything belongs to the Lord. Ishavasyamidam sarvam yatkincha jagatyam jagat. Everything exists on the Lord's energy. Because everything is produced of his energy and exists on it, the energy is not different from him. But still, the Lord says that he is not there. Yeah. That's, anyway, food for thought. But when we understand our constitutional position, everything becomes manifest. So, but otherwise, the false egoistic acceptance of things conditions one, whereas accepting things as they are makes one liberated. Prabhupada repeats the example from the previous verse that due to absorption, due to being absorbed in your money, then if you're absorbed in your money and your money is lost, then you think you're lost. That's what Prabhupada says here, which he also discussed before. But actually he's not identical with the money, and ultimately the money isn't his, it belongs to the Lord. So, but because it belongs to the Lord, it can't be lost. So, but however, as long as one thinks I'm the enjoyer, I'm the Lord, the false concept of life continues, and one remains conditioned. But as soon as the false ego is eliminated, then one is liberated. As soon as the false ego is eliminated. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, as confirmed in the Bhagavatam, being situated in one's real constitutional position is called mukti, or liberation. So devotees, we go on to the next section, from verse 17 to verse 20. Devahuti asks if a devotee can ever be freed from Maya, Krishna. So this is from verse 17 to verse 20. It means it's just 4 verses, so we'll just read straight through them with their purports. So verse 17, Sri Devahuti inquired, my dear Brahman, does material nature ever give release to the spirit soul, since one is attracted to the other eternally? How is their separation possible? So Devahuti, she's inquiring. Prabhupada says it's her first inquiry. Yeah. We may understand that spirit and matter are different. Yes. But we may think that to separate them is not possible by speculation or real understanding, because they've just been together for too long. So how is it possible for the soul to become liberated? So the point given here is that when the soul is separated from the body has no real existence. What is it? It just lies there. Dead. It's a dead body. And when the body is separated from the soul, one cannot perceive the existence of the soul. Let me just read that again. It's important. When the soul is separated from the body has no real existence. And when the body is separated from the soul, one cannot perceive the existence of the soul. But while they're combined, the body and the soul, we can see there's life. But when they're separated, there's no manifestation of either. So this question, Prabhupada says, is more or less impelled by the philosophy of Maya. And as soon as the consciousness is gone, the material combination dissolves, and therefore there is ultimately nothing but voidness. Krishna. Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, this absence of consciousness is called nirvana in Mayavad philosophy. Verse 18. As there's no separate existence of the earth and its aroma, or of water and its taste, there cannot be any separate existence of intelligence and consciousness. What do you think of that? That's pretty powerful. So Prabhupada says that the example given here is that anything material has an aroma. The flower, the earth, everything has an aroma. But the aroma, if the aroma is separated from the matter, then the matter can't be identified. And if there's no taste in water, the water has no meaning. If there's no heat in fire, the fire has no meaning. Similarly, when there's want of intelligence, spirit has no meaning. Verse 19. Hence, even though he is the passive performer of all activities, how can there be freedom for the soul as soon as material nature acts on him and binds him. Ooh, Krishna. So, okay, first paragraph. Although the living entity wants release from matter, he can't get it. As soon as he puts himself under the control of the modes, his acts are influenced by them, and he becomes passive. Bhagavad Gita 3:23 is quoted. Prakrite kriyamanani gunai karamani sarvasha. So that verse is saying, when the living entity is acting under the modes, he thinks he's acting, but he's passive. So in other words, he can't get out of material nature because it has conditioned him. And Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 14 makes the point, it's very difficult to get out. So one can try to speculate about getting out, that everything's void, there's no God, even if the background is spirit, but it's impersonal. But actually the fact is this will not help you get out. So Devahuti poses the question that even if you speculate in different ways, where is liberation while one is under the modes? This is the question, isn't it? That where is liberation while you're under the modes? So Prabhupada again refers to Bhagavad Gita 7:14. And the point there is, only one who has surrendered himself unto the lotus feet of the Supreme Lord Krishna, Mam Aviye Prapadyante, can be freed from the clutches of Maya. Part 2 of the purport. Since Devahuti is coming to the point of surrender, her questions are intelligent. So, these are her questions basically. How can one be liberated? And how can one be in a pure state of spiritual existence as long as he's strongly held by the modes of material nature? So this is the indication of a false meditator. So the false meditators think, I'm the Supreme Soul, material nature's working under me. The sun is moving under me. Moon rises after me. They think that if they think like this, that they'll become liberated. But Prabhupada says, but 3 minutes after finishing this meditation, they're caught again by the modes. They then become thirsty and want to smoke and drink. So we're under the grip, under the strong grip of Maya, but we're thinking we're free. Anyway, Devahuti's question is for such people who claim they're everything, that everything is void and there are no sinful or pious activities. So these are all atheistic inventions, they're all nonsense. That's what Devahuti feels. So Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, actually, unless a living entity surrenders unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as instructed in Bhagavad Gita, there is no liberation or freedom from the clutches of Maya. And on we go to verse 20. Even if the great fear of bondage is avoided by mental speculation and inquiry into the fundamental principles, it may still appear again, since its cause has not ceased. Okay, so there's a substantial purport here, fairly substantial. So, of course, material bondage is caused by putting ourselves under the control of matter because we want to lord it over the material nature. Bhagavad Gita talks of Ichadvesha Samutena. Yes, desire and hate. And Prabhupada describes it a bit. There are two types of propensities in the living entity. One is the desire to be the Lord, and the other propensity is envy of the Lord. Let me just read what Prabhupada says. Two kinds of propensities arise in the living entity. One propensity is icha, which means desire to lord it over material nature, or to be as great as the Supreme Lord. So, of course, these are the beginning causes of material bondage. Yeah. As long as a philosopher, salvationist, voidist, or whoever has some desire to be supreme, or to be everything, or to deny the existence of God, the cause remains. So then that means there's no cause. Then that means there's no question of liberation. So onto the second paragraph, Devahuti very intelligently responds. One may theoretically analyze and say that by knowledge he has become free, but actually as long as the cause exists, he's not free. So Prabhupada again refers to Bhagavad Gita 7:19, that after many, many years of, here he says, such speculative activities, when one comes to his real consciousness and surrenders to Lord Krishna, then the fulfillment of his research and knowledge is actually achieved. There's a gulf of difference between theoretical freedom and actual freedom from bondage. Bhagavatam says that if you give up the path of devotional service in order to take up speculation, you're just wasting your time. The only result of that sort of work is just the work, and that leads to exhaustion. And the example is there. No use beating the husk of a paddy. The rice is already gone. So similarly, by speculating, you can't get free from bondage because the cause still exists. So, Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, one has to nullify the cause, and then the effect will be nullified. This is explained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the following verses. Anyway, that's pretty obvious, isn't it? That if you want to nullify the effect of some cause, then if you nullify the cause, if the cause doesn't exist, then the effect will be nullified. Now for the third section, from verse 21 to verse 30. So let's read the verses. Verse 21, the Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one can get liberation by seriously discharging devotional service unto me, and thereby hearing for a long time about me or from me. By thus executing one's prescribed duties, there will be no reaction, and one will be freed from the contamination of matter. Verse 22. This devotional service has to be performed strongly in perfect knowledge and with transcendental vision. One must be strongly renounced and must engage in austerity and perform mystic yoga in order to be firmly fixed in self-absorption. Verse 23, the influence of material nature has covered the living entity, and thus it is as if the living entity were always in a blazing fire. But by the process of seriously discharging devotional service, this influence can be removed, just as wooden sticks which cause a fire are themselves consumed by it. 24. By discovering the faultiness of his desiring to lord it over material nature, and by therefore giving it up, the living entity becomes independent and stands in his own glory. 25. In the dreaming state, one's consciousness is almost covered, and one sees many inauspicious things. But when he is awakened in fully consciousness, such inauspicious things cannot bewilder him. Verse 26, the influence of material nature cannot harm an enlightened soul, even though he engages in material activities, because he knows the truth of the Absolute, and his mind is fixed on the Supreme Personality of Godhead. 27. When a person thus engages in devotional service and self-realization for many, many years and births, he becomes completely reluctant to enjoy any one of the material planets, even up to the highest planet, which is known as Brahmaloka. He becomes fully developed in consciousness. Verses 28 and 29. My devotee actually becomes self-realized by my unlimited causeless mercy, and thus, when freed from all doubts, he steadily progresses towards his destined abode, which is directly under the protection of my spiritual energy of unadulterated bliss. That is the ultimate perfectional goal of the living entity. After giving up the present material body, the mystic devotee goes to that transcendental abode and never comes back. Right, so on we go to verse 30, which is the end of the chapter, but we're just doing the verses right now. When a perfect yogi's attention is no longer attracted to the byproducts of mystic powers, which are manifestations of the external energy, his progress towards me becomes unlimited, and thus the power of death cannot overcome him. So there you go, devotees. We've just briefly gone through the last verses. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.